Good evening, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. I see that we have quorum, and I call this regular meeting for the Town of Pelham Council for Monday, November 16th, 2015 to order. We will begin with a moment of silence, and really it has two purposes this evening. As is printed on the agenda, the first was to be a moment of silence to honor Marty Collins, the Town of Pelham's former mayor. Mrs. Collins was mayor for the Town of Pelham from 1988 until 1994. She served, I think, from 1972 she entered the political arena with an election as Pelham's trustee for the Niagara South Board of Education, which is now called the District School Board of Niagara, and served the town in that capacity for 16 years, including 2 as vice chair and 2 as chair of the board. As I mentioned, in 1988, she decided to seek election as mayor of the town, where she served as mayor and only councillor, regional councillor, for 6 years before retiring in 1994. She leaves behind her husband, Everett, of 59 years, and her son, Michael and Scott, and a foster daughter, Linda. And we offer condolences to the family. The flags in the town were at half-mast last 2 Fridays ago on the 6th of this, November, and as well at the region last Thursday on our regional council evening. There will be a plaque that will be placed in the council chamber here in the back, along with other former mayors and councillors who have passed away. And at that time, we will be inviting members of the family for a little ceremony at that time. So I would ask that first we keep Marty's family in our thoughts. The second reason for a moment of silence is to honor the victims of the terrible tragedy in Paris on Friday evening. Much has been said throughout the world, and how our hearts and prayers and thoughts go out to those victims of that horrible violence. The arches in the town of Pelham have been, this is the 3rd night that they have been blue, white, and red in honor of Paris. And I would ask on behalf of council that we all keep those victims in our thoughts and prayers, and pray for peace in our world. So I would ask that we have a moment of silence. I would ask all who are able to stand, please. Thank you. I would ask that we begin by the singing of the national anthem, and Councillor Papp, would you please lead us?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patron of, in all thy songs command, with glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, Councillor Papp. Thank you all. we'll now move ahead with the agenda for this evening. It's been moved by Councillor Durley, seconded by Councillor King, that the agenda for the November 16th, 2015 regular meeting of council be adopted. Are there any additions, changes to that agenda? Councillor Papp?
Thank you. With the consent and discretion of council and yourself, I would like to add under reports from members of council 13.1.3, and I will just do a brief report on the Wellspring Charity Gala that was held at White Oaks on November 13th, this past Friday.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Kersey? All those in favor of that amendment? Motion carried. Thank you. Any other changes to the agenda or additions? There being none, I'll call the question on the amended agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. The next item is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Do any members have any conflicts of interest they need to disclose? Councillor Papp.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, once again, I have to declare a conflict of interest with the presentation tonight under 7.1.2, Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Niagara. Since I am the president of the board and I have been consistent in that, I will be stepping out during that ceremony, and members of our board and our staff will carry on.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. So noted. Any other conflicts? Can that be so noted? Thank you. Now we move to presentations. The first is a presentation from our auditor. There he is. He's moved. He was in the front row. He's moved slightly to the back. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Trevor?
All right. Thank you for having me here. So I will walk through our audit plan as briefly and painlessly as possible. The copy that I sent to the town actually had this picture on it that has, I'll just refer to it as a picture. Some of you may see trees and some of you may see a forest. It just entirely depends on your perspective. This is merely an auditor's way of trying to be colorful and adding pictures, and it got taken away, and I tried so hard. So I'm going to go through this at a pretty high level. So this audit plan looks fairly different from what you would have seen in prior years, yes. But it's only just to try to make it a little bit easier to read. Audit standards have not changed. There is one change to accounting standards, which I will speak to in a minute. So it looks a little bit different if you're wondering what's changed from prior years and whatnot. In terms of content, nothing. Just some of the accounting standards, which I'll speak to in just a minute. So on this slide, we just talk about our audit plan at a glance. And really, this is just a reminder of the fact that we're here to provide an audit opinion on the fairness of the presentation of the town's financial statements for the upcoming year ending December 31st, 2015. And I'll speak to some of the other areas in a minute when we get there. In terms of our audit explained, what we try to do on these next two slides is just kind of break down in a pictorial format what it is that we do as your auditors and some of the things along the way. The first on the top left, we refer to significant events. We're not aware of any what we would consider to be significant events that would impact the town's audit for the upcoming year end, save the one change in accounting standards, again, which I keep alluding to and I'll speak to in a minute. The bottom left hand of the page, we talk about materiality. What that essentially means is that we're not here every single day auditing every single transaction that occurs at the town. We do perform our audit with the concept of materiality in mind, and for the town we'll be basing that on 3% of expenses, which is consistent with prior years. What I believe should be of most interest to you is our reporting threshold to you. I know I've talked about this for a couple of years now. Our reporting threshold is 5% of our materiality, which is a pretty low number. So what I mean by our reporting threshold, if we identify an error that is greater than that threshold, we'll tell you about it as part of our year-end reporting to you, whether or not it's corrected by management. So usually we don't have anything to worry about in that regard, but that is our threshold, and it's a low number, so obviously I'm biased, but if I were in your shoes, I'd be comfortable with that number because it's pretty reliable. On this slide, we talk a fair bit about fraud risk, and it's not something that's meant to raise any alarm bells or things like that. It's just some of the testing that we're required to do under Canadian audit standards as your external auditors. There are a few things that we do in terms of testing a sample of journal entries. I've talked about this in the past, and that all the testing that we do in your audit is completely random except for our testing of journal entries, where the standard actually requests that we look for fraud. So we're looking for entries that are a high dollar amount, round numbers, things that may be prepared or posted by somebody who usually isn't involved in the process, something that may have been posted on a holiday, which one of my clients does quite regularly and drives me nuts. But it's those types of things. I'm not giving away the farm here, but those are some of the things that we're looking for. Another one of the tests we do is called a look-back test. So we take a look at any significant estimates that were made in last year's financial statements and see what the outcome of those estimates were. The idea is to try to get an indication as to whether it's any bias to always overstate or understate and things like that. We've never found any indication of anything at the town. That said, there were standards require us to do that test on an annual basis, so we'll continue to do so. We, as we've done in prior years, we're required to ask some questions of the council, and we'll circulate an email with some of those questions and hopefully get some responses before we start our audit work. So we'll be proceeding with that again. The next couple slides, we talk about some of the audit risks that we go into a little bit more detail that we had on the first page. I'm not going to bore you with all of it. Revenue recognition and management override of controls. Those are two different areas. Revenue recognition on this slide and management override of controls is on the next slide. Again, Canadian audit standards presume that there is a risk of fraud related to those two areas and require us as your external auditors to do a little bit more work. So we do a fair amount of detailed testing in and around revenue that shows up on your financial statements. And again, that's not just specific to the town. You'll find that for any audit of any financial statements anywhere in Canada, that's the standard. And you can see there, we've got a little asterisk there to just identify it as it's a significant risk, so we do a fair amount of testing. The piece that I alluded to a fair bit earlier is around the new accounting standard. That's an accounting standard for contaminated sites. You may have heard people talking about this. What this requires the town to do is a fair amount of work, which we've talked to management about, in terms of coming up with an inventory of all the land that the town has and determine if any of those sites are inactive. For any of those sites that may be inactive, you need to determine whether or not there's any contamination in those sites. And what the accounting standard deems contamination to be is anything that's above an established environmental threshold. So if you have contamination in an inactive site that's over and above an environmental standard, then you need to record a liability in your financial statements. So a fair amount of work in terms of coming up with what the list of sites may be, and for those list of sites, what, if any, remediation costs should be recorded and set out in your financial statements. And again, all municipalities across the province are going through this new standard this year, so a fair amount of work that everybody's having to go through. Please don't shoot me, I'm just the auditor, I don't set the standards. So that's kind of the big change, if it were, from prior years. This is kind of what we're going to be focusing on as part of the audit this year. This slide is not meant to scare you. It's really just meant for information. It's pretty tough to read up on the screen there, but if any of you have it on your computers or hard copy, this just goes into a little bit more detail around some of the risks of fraud that you may see in a municipality in a typical business, and where the likelihood of some of those things occurring is. It's just merely there for your information. I'm not going to propose to go through the appendices. What they are, we go through a bit more detail in terms of what our audit plan is. It's there for your information. We talked about some of our communication requirements as required in the Canadian audit standards that we'll get back to you as part of our year-end results report, and just some information for the council as well. So I'm happy to pause it there, since there isn't a whole lot of change, and take any questions you may have or go into further detail if you wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, for your presentation. Do members of council have any questions for our auditor? Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, on page 25 of, I guess it's our agenda, I'm not sure what page number, I guess 19 of your document, where we're talking about, in the appendix 1, it's talking about audit approach and the role of council. And one of the bullet points is the role it exercises in oversight of fraud risk assessment and the establishment of mitigating controls. Could you run through some of the mitigating controls that we might be able to exercise? To my knowledge, we really have never gotten ourselves involved in that, and kind of wondered what your view was on that, and what sort of things we could put in place to assist in assuring our citizens that our statements are accurate and free of fraud.
Very good question. So every municipality is different. So obviously for you guys, I report directly to council. For some municipalities, they have an audit subcommittee where we meet and perhaps go into a little bit more detail on the audit plan and some controls and things like that. I bet you do more than you think you do. I'm sure management reports to you in terms of your status versus actual versus budget, and council would ask questions as to try to get explanations on certain variances and things like that, and that in and of itself is a control, because you're trying to understand what's going on and things like that. That's actually a pretty strong control. I know that management does some pretty good internal reporting around talking about those things in a fair amount of detail compared to what you as council would see. Some of the other things you could do, you could ask for what are some of the processes that are in place at the town, and how does a check get cut? And talk to me about how, from the procurement side all the way till the end, to how a check gets out the door and what happens. So you could ask for that to let me see that process description for how something like that happens. You could do that. I can assure you that we as your auditors, we do that, and we're comfortable with the controls that are in place. But that's a question that you could ask to say, are the auditor, are you looking at that? So that's something that you can do. Really, it's meant to be, it's an oversight kind of question, oversight role. There isn't an expectation that you as council would actually be doing anything per se. It's just I didn't mean that the way it sounded, but just in terms of the oversight is kind of what you'd be looking at.
Right, and just to build on that, in terms of this slide itself, the auditor does send an email out to all of council with this asking, is there any fraud? Do you know of any, like a specific question? So just wanted to build on the answer from Mr. Ferguson. Anything further on that item?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Just, I don't know if you've highlighted before the idea here, I'm trying to get back to the page, about property liability for contaminated sites. So there is a sort of a minimum standard or something, is that, who sets that standard? Is it an accounting standard or is it a environmental standard?
So this is an accounting standard on how to account for potential contamination. So if you have I was just talking to management about this. If you have a site that you think has contamination, and let's say that contamination level is 100, for lack of a better term, if there's an environmental standard that says the maximum contamination you can have is 75, then you're over that standard, and you have to get it, according to the accounting standard, you need to book a liability for what it would cost to get you down to that 75 level.
Okay.
That's what the standard is.
Okay, that's good. That I've not seen that highlighted before, and I'm not saying we have those kind of sites, but it's good to know, especially, I'm thinking, I guess, wearing my regional hat. We have some of those sites, and we always talk about former waste management sites, et cetera. So thank you for that. Councillor Durley has a question that's perhaps prompted out of that. Councillor Durley.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you. You mentioned inactive. So if something is active, then of course this doesn't apply?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey, seconded by Councillor Papp. Be it resolved that the information presented by the 2016 Audit Service Plan, Deloitte, be received. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. I guess it is 2015, right? 2015. It's 2015 year. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now we have, oh yes, Councillor Papp. We're now moving to a presentation by Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I believe we have another Trevor that's going to be presenting to us. Is that true? Or is it Ms. Vander Hayden? Oh, Trevor Marsh, Phil Busby, and Ms. Vander Hayden. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Mayor Augustine, councillor members, senior management, staff, and community members. I'm pleased to be here this evening to, along with two board members, Trevor Marsh and Phil Busby, to acknowledge contributions that senior management staff have made to our organization, as well as Councillor King. Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Niagara has been serving this area since 1964 with the mission of enabling children to be all they can be. And we do that through providing mentoring services, either community-based or site-based, as well as in group programs. So every year we have an annual general meeting, and this year for recognition, there were two that we wanted to specifically recognize, not only at our general meeting, but here at council. I ask that Trevor step forward and do one presentation.
Yes, Trevor Marsh, longstanding board member of Big Brothers for probably 23 years, and Barb's responsible for a lot of the agencies servicing the children. As a board member, we are responsible for setting the strategic direction of our agency and, you know, enabling Barb to support these children. So we had to do a strategic plan, and we heard about the planning that the town of Pelham puts on, led by Dan and his senior management staff, and Darren and his senior management staff, and they came, they met with us, the board members, and it went really well. In fact, I've been involved in many of these strategic plans throughout my life, and this had to be the best. So as an individual, even of the town of Pelham, a taxpayer, a resident, you know, it made me feel really good that these people volunteered their time to help our agency come up with a new strategic plan for the next 5 years. So I'd like to ask Dan and the rest of your senior staff to come up and accept this award, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Or, sorry, Darren. So on behalf of Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Niagara, thank you again, Darren. Thank you, our pleasure.
Our pleasure, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
As Trevor said, we certainly couldn't have done it alone, and the process complexity certainly has opened our eyes and taken things to the next level. So I do know that our board president, Peter Papp, certainly probably persuaded senior staff to assist us, but certainly we appreciate all you did. And I know it was also through time that council has provided the staff to contribute to the community. So we certainly appreciate that. The other presentation will be done by Phil Busby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm here this evening to present an award to Councillor Catherine King for her involvement, for your involvement in the Sisterhood of Style event that Big Brothers and Big Sisters have been doing for a couple years now. Recently took place at Lookout Golf Course. We really wanted to thank you for your efforts as our chair for the past 2 years. We rely on leaders such as yourself in our community to step forward and help us out and help the children that we serve, especially the young ladies for which the event took place. On behalf of our committee, I would ask, our board, sorry, and our agency, I would ask that you step forward so I can present you with your award.
And council, we thank you very much for this opportunity, and probably won't be in front of you before Christmas, so we wish you all the best through the season and look forward to interacting in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We appreciate you coming forward and doing that. As you mentioned, it is, in terms of the first, it is a policy that council approved that we encourage staff to go out into the community and volunteer, and very pleased that they could use the creative problem-solving process to assist Big Brothers Big Sisters with their strategic planning. So congratulations, Darren and Carrie and others that might have been involved in that. So congratulations. thank you for honoring them, and congratulations as well to Councillor King for volunteering and taking a leadership role. Big Brothers Big Sisters is an organization, an agency that does tremendous work. That's why we have dedicated board members like Trevor who have been doing so for the last 23 years, as well as Barb as executive director, your ongoing leadership. So on behalf of council, I want to thank you very much for the great work that you do in the community. Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you. So we don't need a motion. Congratulations, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we move to, pardon? Oh, we need to call Councillor Pat back. Now I would invite Councillor Beatty to come forward, please. Thank you again. Good evening, Councillor.
Members of council and staff, you have before you a two-page report on the activities of the last standing committee and last Thursday's regional council meeting. I don't have an update for you from the council meeting. It's basically straightforward as in this report, but I would like to comment on a few of the items. Under corporate services, the last item, Niagara Regional Policing, basically an alderman or councillor from Niagara Lake, Jim Collard, has been very, very vocal on this issue, feeling that it's inappropriate that assessment is the main base for policing. There is another model. I think that there will be uses, which is based upon population and degree of use, degree of calls, etc. There are five for sure communities which are in effect overtaxed in terms of that. We in Pelham would be one of those. So this was received by the committee, but they took no further action. And I'm not certain what the mechanism is, whether it would be the province that would have to change that rule or not. But it's a case where there is a disadvantage for communities which have higher assessment value in a community such as ourselves, Grimsby, Niagara and the Lake, and so on.
So maybe just to speak on that, Councillor, it's an odd thing, and I said this in committee at the region, but the councillor from Niagara and Lake is a little bit confused because it's how the OPP sets their budget. So their budget is based on a certain value or amount per household, and then it's also based on service calls. I think it's a 60-40 split in that way. And then what the councillor is wanting instead, so that's how you calculate how much you charge.
Right.
Barrie or really or whatever, all the other communities that have the OPP, that's how they calculate how much they charge because it's a big force. And that was worked on over the last couple of years with the province. But what the councillor was trying to do was trying to say, well, that's how it should be paid in Niagara, so that they would take the Niagara and the Lake per household number, and they would take the number of calls, and that's how they would pay their portion of the bill for Niagara Regional Police. But it became clear in the questioning during the committee that no, those communities, Barrie or wherever, actually then take that valuation and they charge it just like they do with other regional or town or city services on the assessment, so that it's property paid for by property tax. So we are following through on that portion of it, and so they kind of got it confused, and that's why staff was recommending take no further action.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Next one on planning and development, the first item that's there is a review. There are many reviews going on in the province right now of a number of acts. One is on the Conservation Authorities Act, and some recommendations came forward in terms of looking at the issue of bill for services. One community, the city of Ottawa, in fact, the Conservation Authority doesn't go through the local government. In fact, they directly bill, and it shows on the taxpayer's tax form that so much is being apportioned for the Conservation Authority. So that was one of the areas, and the appeal process as well is being examined. A lot of talk about the Conservation Authority. As you may already know, the current CEO discovered 2 years ago that basically there was no written agreement amongst Haldeman, Hamilton, and Niagara, where there should have been, or there was an assumption for probably some considerable number of years that there was an agreement. The provincial mandate says in the absence of a written agreement that you do it based upon population. And as you know, that end of where Benbrook is in Hamilton has just exploded in population. So Hamilton hasn't been very happy about the very significant increase. We should be getting a comparable decrease in terms of ours, but the money has been held in abeyance until the cash flow works out. There is an appeal underway, I understand, the first week of December, that a hearing is going forth with a mediator to try and resolve this issue, but it's been a case where it's caused considerable concern in terms of the fact that monies are being put aside, but in fact, they're more than what they should be for the residents of Niagara. At some point in time, I hope in the near future that will be resolved, and we can see that the equitable formula will be put in place, which is based upon population. Under corporate services, sorry, I've got that one already, wrong page. Under public health, we had a very lengthy report from a consultant who did extensive review of the social assistance and employment opportunity staffing level, and found out the good news was much of best practice compared to other communities is happening in Niagara in terms of the responsiveness of staff, in terms of the number of people getting placed into jobs, et cetera. Much of the best practice in Ontario is happening here in Niagara. The downside is that it's happening at very great expense, because we're in excess of 8 staff members less than what this consultant believes that we should have compared to the other regions in Niagara. Because we've embarked upon a zero budget direction for discussion, there's going to be clearly the rubber's going to hit the road when that decision comes forward. We also have a significant request from the ambulance service because of our aging population and the response times to increase significantly on the ambulance side. So that will happen later in the budgetary process, but it's a significant amount of money when you're talking over 8 staff for the social services department. And lastly, just to point out, the Niagara Specialized Transit has been up until now with the Red Cross. That's been transferred to a private firm. The advantage is it's being funded through the Provincial Gas Tax Reserve Fund, and this corporation basically is taking on not just the operational component, but also is purchasing the fleet, rather than the region having to do that. So those are the 4 items that I'd like to bring forward, but if you want to answer questions on any others that are included in the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beatty, for your presentation. Just to add on to the Conservation Authority piece, I think it was an amendment that I made that suggested that we would allow or break out the amount that we're going to be taxing. It's quite clear. It's become quite clear from certain members of the NPCA, the CAO, and the chair, that really the region has nothing to do with the setting of their budget. It's just for information, and that it's up to the board, and they can just levy it, and that's it. So I made the amendment that we set that aside separately, so that area municipalities may want to put that separately on the tax bill to let people know that that's separate. So that was approved. Any other questions for Councillor Beatty on any of the items that he raises? Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a very brief question through you. Councillor Beatty, I noticed under corporate services you received a report regarding revenue generation opportunities. Was that tied in with the land transfer tax and other tools that are available to municipalities with respect to revenue generation? Or
Back to the mayor in that he sits on corporate services. I don't.
Okay.
We're giving the summary report, but the details, mayor would be more knowledgeable than I would.
Thank you. You may recall that at our last council meeting, we did have a presentation by the real estate board and suggested to the province that we do not use that tool. So that was not one of the tools. Essentially, it was things like, it was sort of the standard things like billboards on roadways, sale of property. I did share it with the treasurer, but there wasn't a lot of kind of new areas there. Maybe solar panels, that kind of thing. But there wasn't a lot of kind of eureka moments in there.
Okay, thank you.
I can share that report with all of council.
That'd be great.
Okay. Thank you. We will do that. Councillor King.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wonder, Councillor Beatty, if you might be able to give us an update on the Port Robinson Ferry.
The matter was referred to here, but it was simply a memo in terms of a direction. It wasn't decision-making. It's a case where the matter, just to bring council up to date, the Seaway Authority, when the Port Robinson Bridge was knocked down, went into an agreement, but it was a time-limited agreement in terms of providing 2 services. One was the ferry service in the summer, spring, fall hours, but a van during the rest of the year in terms of getting people back and forth to Port Robinson. It has become a very significant feature to the bicycling community, both locals in Niagara as well as visitors to Niagara, because not everyone can do the circle route in its entirety. It's a significant trek, but that middle point breaks it down, and especially for access to the hotels in Niagara Falls. What's happened is the Seaways indicated that they're prepared to do some updates. They've done, I think, some repairs already to the ship. They're looking at some accessibility standards in terms of the both sides, in terms of loading and unloading areas, but they're at the point of ending that agreement. So we've got the City of Thorold is basically saying that they can't absorb the full cost of that. In all likelihood, they'll be coming to the region for funding. But there still is some considerable view on council that the federal government feet should still be held to the fire, because that was a regional route when the bridge was taken out. And while it was a time-limited process, the van, I think, is out of service, or has been for the last year. But the ferry has become a significant integral part of the tourism network and the cycling network here. It'll be coming back to the Public Works Committee, I think I heard the last week in November.
I think so, yeah. They're currently working on a report.
And that report will be the one that will have some recommendation. We'll have background in terms of what the costs are, and look at what the options are in terms of the funding process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, and just building on that, that is part of transportation. I wonder, would they be eligible for gas tax from the feds?
Interesting question.
I did ask that question of the City of Thorold. I don't think they've applied for it, although they should have.
Okay. Are they aware of that? And, sorry.
They are now,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Papp.
On another matter, what is the sense, Councillor Beatty, through you and the mayor? I read that report about the social assistance. It has some very good stuff, and it has some very disturbing impact. If these people are not deployed, then the ability to get people placed in jobs, along with finding them someplace to live and stay here. So what is your sense of how, because I keep hearing zero-based, what's your feeling on how council will react to this request for the additional? I see both of you have supported it. I'm just curious to see what's the sense around the table.
There are those that believe it's zero regardless of the impact. That's why when that was first put out as a guidance, I put in a clause, a motion that said, and we're going to delineate all of the service ramifications before we finalize the budget. So it's going to be made very, very clear to the public, if that happens, that we're talking about significant service cuts to people who are most in need. But the same issue has come up. We've gone through all of the rate budgets. We've gone through all of the basically capital budgets. The one that's hung up is the one with housing. Again, those that are most in need in terms of dollars. So we're looking to a significant showdown in terms of whether the zero guidance is going to lead to zero budget, which means service cuts or lack of action on service. I pointed out the two areas, well, three now, I guess it is: housing, social assistance, and the ambulance service. All are big ticket items, and in terms of stuff, there will be, I would hope, significant dialogue and significant media coverage of what the impacts are if those that are seeking zero regardless of all cost win the day. Major impacts to those that are most in need in our community.
Councillor.
The reason I say that, as a former staff member of the region, I was there when the caseloads went up to 14,000, 15,000. And we hired on a temporary basis, basically focused on that exact point, getting people back to long-term sustainable employment and off Ontario Works, and find them an affordable housing that they could sustain. So, because it's part of the property, and I know both of you understand this, I'll be watching this carefully, and whatever I can do, because when you read in between the lines, you're right. If you don't do this, you'll burn the staff out, the services will be cut, and the community agencies will not be able to respond to the downpour of what will happen after that. And you'll discourage people from finding work, and they'll move on.
And you touched on the impact on the internal staff side.
It'll
They're under
be
considerable stress, and a stressful time period when they're meeting people who were the first time ever going on social assistance.
Oh, yes.
Which just adds to the degree of anxiety in the process.
Well, good luck to you, and at the Budget Review Committee on the 26th, I think you're going to be dealing with this.
The one resolution that did come from this consultant study is that those that were on temporary are being made permanent. That was part of the concern, because that temporary has extended for a number of years.
Yes, it
Yeah,
has.
it's longer than 2 years, yeah. And
Okay.
I think the importance of doing this report shows that they kind of looked at it and compared to other like jurisdictions and said, how do we get the biggest bang for the buck, right? And to try to get people off. And because of those adding of temporary workers, there needs to be a bit of a rejigging of the staff positions and things. So it's quite clear in terms of, and I asked the question during committee, I said, are there people that, you know, if you could only have 5 instead of the number you need, what would they be? You know, and they said, well, these are the ones. So it's quite focused on that to get people back to work and back as productive members of society, both for their sake and our sake.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Beatty, for your report. It's been moved by Councillor Papp, seconded by Councillor Kersey. Be it resolved that the November 16th, 2015 report submitted by Regional Councillor Beatty be received for information. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thanks again. Take care. Thank you. Now we move to adoption of minutes of council. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey, seconded by Councillor Papp. Be it resolved, the following minutes be adopted as printed, circulated, and read. C39, 2015, regular meeting of council of November 2nd, and C40, special meeting of council of closed session of November 9th, 2015. Are there any errors or omissions in those minutes? There being none, I call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Now we move to consent agenda items to be considered in block. Are there any items that members of council would like to lift for separate consideration? Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under 11.5.1, the resolution from the town of Fort Erie, support urging the province to reverse its new policy restricting number of family physicians who can join family health networks and organizations. I think it needs some attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll deem that lifted. Any other items, Councillor?
I'd like to lift, Mr. Mayor, 11.3.2, the Thursday night experience, 2015 final report.
11.3.2. Oh, you'd like to lift that? Okay. Thank you. Any other items? I would ask that we lift item 11.5.7, which is a letter from Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs about our request for the Community Infrastructure Fund. So if we can lift that. Thank you. And I want to make sure I get it here. There we go. Okay, thank you. It has been moved by Councillor Kersey, and I need a seconder. Councillor Junkin, will you second this?
Yep.
Thank you. Be it resolved, the following consent agenda items be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved as applicable. 1, recommendations arising from the Committee of the Whole of November 2nd, and the motion is be it resolved that the recommendations be received and approved. We also have the Committee of the Whole minutes, the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole of November 2nd, and minutes of the public meeting under the Planning Act of November 9th, 2015. Staff reports of routine nature are for information or action. We have the 2016 budget schedule, and the resolution is be it resolved the council receive and approve the 2016 budget schedule. Next, we have the Old Pelham Town Hall Acoustics Project Seniors Room. Be it resolved the council receive the issue summary report, Old Pelham Town Hall Acoustics Investigation Seniors Room, and the council approve funds of $3,103.92 plus HST to secure a contractor to supply and install paint match sound panels in the seniors room. We have one item of action correspondence of routine nature. It's from the Southern Tier Admirals Hockey Association, and the resolution, be it resolved the council received the request dated October 28th, 2015 from the Southern Tier Admirals Hockey Association requesting rooms at night time at the Pelham's new twin pad facility. And I presume that will be considered because staff are working on a report, so that will go with that staff report. Then we have 4 items under information correspondence items. We had 6, 2 are lifted. The first is a resolution for fairness and provincial infrastructure funds, and a thank you for support. The second is the information from the Royal Canadian Legion Military Service Recognition Book, Volume 2, an ad which we placed. The third is a thank you letter from the Font Hill Bandshell Concerts. The fourth is the Fort Erie Resolution, a request for endorsement of the Ministry of Transportation requirements for Bowman Road QEW interchange structure. That has already been dealt with. And the final is the Ontario Ministry of Energy Correspondence acquisition of Hydro One customers, and that's based on our visit with the parliamentary assistant at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Questions or comments regarding any of those items? Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of thoughts. At the committee of the whole meeting, the discussion regarding the sale of 792 Welland Road, there were some unanswered questions. Are we going to be getting a report from staff regarding details around that sale?
Thank you, Councillor Durley. I have a conflict on that, which was declared in the minutes. So maybe I'm going to have to leave the room for you to get that answer.
Well, I'm just requesting a report because there were questions that came up, and I know it was of concern to many around this table as well as some of the people that were present. And
yeah, I'm gonna declare that conflict.
Okay.
And the reason I didn't declare it because it was in the minutes, but now that you're speaking about it, I'm in a conflict of interest because I own property within the circulation area for 792 Welland Road. And I would ask you to chair the meeting.
I'll do it from here, sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there were questions considering the terms of the sale, and I'm just wondering the status of that. Will it come to us in a report, Director?
Yes, thank you. We did actually have a report that was going to be on the agenda tonight, and then it was, I guess, subsequently pulled late on Thursday. The report did indicate that we were certainly compliant with the terms of the purchase and sale agreement, and there was no issue that way. But I did meet with the proponent, the potential purchaser of that property on Thursday afternoon, and they requested that the bylaw not come forward tonight. They want to review their proposal, and I believe that there's probably going to be some adjustments to the bylaw to deal with some site-specific considerations, so that's why the matter wasn't on the agenda tonight.
So we look forward to seeing that coming forward, perhaps at the next meeting, Madam Director?
I'm not sure. Depending on the nature of the changes that they are requesting, we may need another public meeting, so I need to see some of the details of their plan. But as soon as we have those details, we'll be bringing a report back to you.
Thank you. We'll leave that in your capable hands.
Thank you.
Okay, we can bring the mayor back in, please.
Mr. Chair, with respect, do you need to vote on that separately now?
No, we received a report and direction has been given, and we're anticipating a report to come forward in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other
Yes.
questions on the consent agenda? Hopefully you don't send me out of the room on this one. Councillor Durley.
Yeah, I won't say that. 1132, that's been pulled, so I'll discuss that when it does come up. The letter from the Southern Tier Admirals, I know staff is working with them. I'm just wondering, in deliberations with them, if they're willing to put some money towards some of the requests that they're doing, and I'm just wondering how that would impact on ice time for programs that are offered to Pelham-based organizations. We want to make sure that our people are taken care of as well as everybody else, so I'm sure you will take that into account when you do this deliberation, but they have a big ask, and ask with a K, and the we definitely need to be cognizant of that. Thank you. And that's all for now.
He's on fire.
Thank you very much, Councillor Durley. I hope the clerk noted that, the spelling that you indicated. Thank you. Are there any other, with a K, are there any other items under the consent agenda? There being none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Might I suggest that since there are some individuals here from regarding the report for the Thursday night experience, that we deal with that one first, if that's okay. And so that is 11.3.2. And the motion is, be it resolved that council receive the issue summary report, Thursday night experience 2015 final report, and the council endorse the Farmers Market and Bandshell Committee to continue to work together for the 2016 operations, and that the Thursday parking plan be approved in the 2016 operating budget. I'm presuming that that means to go to the operating budget for consideration. Councillor Rubiak, you raised the issue.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you and colleagues will recall that at the beginning of this year we had a discussion with regard to the question of licensing Peace Park on Thursday evenings. My anticipation had been at that time that the report that we would have on the year would address that so that we could make a decision. I think we committed to making a decision before the beginning of next year with regard to any change in that aspect. So I wonder if we might amend the motion by including, a request for report and recommendation with regard to licensing the entire park.
Okay. Thank you.
In future Thursday night experiences.
So I'm hearing that Ms. Van Ravensway is prepared to answer that, but is that okay? Ms. Van Ravensway.
For you, Mr. Mayor. That actual report with regard to the supper market, that's a supper market report. It is coming December the 7th meeting. We will be meeting with our AGCO inspector this week, actually, just to confirm how they felt about how everything ran, and you'll be receiving that. This is a general report with regard to all three committees working together, as well as the transportation plan, or the parking plan. As we know, that's very important to us.
Absolutely.
Thank
you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, would you like to refer this one to that meeting, or are you fine with this? Knowing that something's going to be coming?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't aware that there would be a subsequent report that would address that. Since there is, I'm quite happy with the motion as it stands.
Okay, thank you. Any others to this motion as it stands? Councillor Papp?
So just to pick up on that, so when, through you to Vicky, when that report comes, that'll also give us sort of a idea of what the protocol will be for the next year, along with what the Bandshell is planning to do, so that we don't get ourselves in the conundrum that we were, and that all parties are on board, and if there are any types of, I should say, issues or things that need to be resolved, they can be resolved early in the process, so that we got a sort of a comprehensive look of what's going to take place over the next 3 or 4 months during the summer. Is that fair to say?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, most definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments to the report? Certainly appreciate the report. Some of these statistics we've seen before in terms of the Thursday night experiences, and I think we saw some of that under the Summerfest report in terms of the Beach Party Boys, and the 7,400 that we counted that participated in that, which is a huge number, and I think the most we've ever seen at one of the events. I would ask councillors when we do look at that report next meeting, that we do also consider the survey results that are here. Some very good responses from folks on this. Number of returning attendees, why people attend the Thursday nights, new vendors you'd like to see, etc. So some very helpful and interesting information there that we can also keep in mind when we review the subsequent report. Anything further to that? Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried, and we do appreciate members of the Fonthill Bandshell that are here listening to the discussion as well. So it looks like we're going to get another report next meeting, and I would hope that staff would also be able to circulate that to you. You probably are interested in that element as well. So thank you for that. Thank you. Now we move to the item that was lifted, Councillor Durley, regarding supporting the province, or supporting the province to reverse its policy. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This, I feel, is a very important issue. Healthcare is a need that seems to be increasing steadily, and the provincial government has recently restricted the number of family physicians who can enter into a family health network or family health organization. Fort Erie caught up on that because they have been active in recruiting family physicians, just like we are, and they're requesting that the province of Ontario have a look at it and reverse this decision because we are short of doctors, and this is restricting doctors from entering into the system. So I suggest that we support, endorse, and circulate our support for this to our normal networks, because I feel it is a very important thing, and I think that the province should have a good, sober second look at this and allow any doctors who wish to come into municipalities to do so.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and that's been seconded by Councillor King, that we receive it, support, and endorse, and that the resolution be forwarded to the Ministry of Health, local MPPs, Ontario Medical Association, and local Niagara municipalities. Thank you. Any further discussion regarding that resolution? I know that it's something that the folks working with the docks in the Fawn Hill area have expressed concern with, and saying that it is something that the province just sort of changed in June. Didn't tell anybody, and it has a bit of an impact on their discussion, so I'm sure they'll be pleased as well. Anything further? There being none, I call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. The next item is this correspondence from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, the Rural Programs Branch. I ask that this be added to the agenda, and I would ask, maybe I'm going to ask the Treasurer to speak briefly to it, what it is, and then I'm going to just ask colleagues to consider something. Madam Treasurer or Mr. CAO, this is the regarding the OSIF grant? OSIF grant?
We're referring to the letter that we received?
Yes.
Okay, so it's impossible to determine exactly which application this was for, because they're not detailing specifically if it was for the Small Communities Fund component or the OSIF component. We're assuming the letter is in tandem at this time, because we have not received a second letter from the province regarding this. So basically, there's the expression of interest that we've presented to the province, and through that criteria, the first level of criteria they go through is the health and safety and how critical that health and safety need is, and also your economic status. So it's clear on this letter that we failed the first compliance part based on our economic status, and that was detailed in the letter.
Okay, thank you. I asked the Treasurer to highlight it because it is, I guess the question is, does that mean that it's outlined here, total weighted property assessment per household, median household income, average net financial assets per household, average residential property taxes, etc. You know, is this going to be a barrier? And it's similar to something else on the agenda earlier, resolution of fairness on provincial infrastructure funds. Is this going to be a barrier to get other grants from upper levels of government? And well, maybe I'll ask the Treasurer to.
It certainly has been a barrier. The last, I think, 3 or 4 grant applications have said the same thing to us. To note is some information that we received from the Municipal Finance Officers Association, suggesting that some of this criteria for grant awards has to be reviewed and looked at by the new government body, and they have identified some of the hardships that we're experiencing where we're criticized for doing well as an organization and maintaining our assets in good repair and so forth. And then when it comes to major projects that, we might need some funding for, then we're criticized for doing that. So I know that they are looking at it. We are looking at it at the provincial level in our discussions as well with the province when we have our area treasurers meetings. So all we can do is try to make them change the legislation and the requirements with respect to the grant applications.
Thank you. So I think that's the piece, that if a municipality like ours does well, takes care of its infrastructure, invests in it, has high property values, we're shut out of all those grants. But the caveat is that those communities that don't do that get all the grants. So it doesn't seem fair, and it speaks to this motion of fairness, which is really political fairness as opposed to economic fairness. But to me, it's an issue of economic fairness. The residents from our municipality contribute. In fact, they probably contribute more than other communities, just as we heard at the regional side. They do the same with the provincial or federal side with income taxes, et cetera. And communities like ours should be eligible for various grants. So I lifted it. What I'd ask is if maybe council could consider a motion that we would send this, direct this back to staff to come up with an appropriate resolution that we can then consider at our next council meeting, that we would send that message to the province, and we'll give staff time to draft an appropriate motion. So is there someone who would make that motion to receive it and refer it to staff? Councillor Ribbiak, second by Councillor Papp, and ask them to put together a resolution that we'll then consider at our next meeting regarding this issue. Any further discussion to that, Councillor Papp?
Just briefly, it's such a dichotomy. We look after our municipal corporation, we invest money in it, yet when we have the opportunity to access, as you say, additional resources to help us sustain that and maintain it and strengthen it, we're turned down.
Right.
So I think it's important for us to challenge them on those values or whatever those prerequisites are and say, you know, and I'm going back, Mr. Mayor, do you remember the fellow from AMO, the private guy that was talking about is to save for these things, to always build in? So we're doing exactly what good financial planning is doing.
Right.
Yeah, we're being told you can't get any money.
Right.
So I agree.
Thank you. Anyone else at this point? And we look forward to considering that. So I'm going to call the question on receiving and referring to staff to develop a resolution for council's consideration. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you very much, colleagues, for that. I believe those are all the items that were lifted for separate consideration. Thank you, those of the public that were here for those. I'll now move quickly to the mayor's report. Thank you, colleagues. I'm pleased to provide a little bit of a report. You have a written report of the significant activity since our last council meeting. I do want to highlight a few. The first is I did take part in a Syrian refugee discussion that was held with the Pelham Ministerial Group. So these are the major churches of the town coming together as they do to talk about issues of faith in the community. And they wanted to talk about this, and I was invited, as was Clara Mazerol, the CEO of the Welland Heritage Council and Multicultural Center, about the process to sponsor and settle refugees. They've heard from their, I was going to say constituents, from their parishioners, that this is something that they want the members of the church to kind of try and organize. So what they're doing is they are hosting a meeting on the 26th of November, a Thursday at 7 p.m. at the Fenwick United Church, to see if there might be some individuals who might be interested in helping coordinating this for the Pelham community. So there were a few actually at the meeting, and they're trying to put the word out that there might be others that might be interested in this. I do want to highlight as well that there was a meeting here in the council chamber with representatives of the District School Board of Niagara. You'll recall that we received that letter last meeting about a meeting coming up on the 6th of November. And we invited them here, and members of the Pelham Library Board, the Friends of Maple Acre Library, town staff, to really talk about what's called the West Pelham Accommodation Review. They outlined that there might be some opportunities. We kind of brainstormed a little bit. There might be opportunities to work together in terms of if that plan moves forward with Pelham Center closing at EW Far. Those opportunities include parks like the Cherry Ridge Park in behind EW Far, the potential for library services as they've done with Diamond Trail, I believe it's called, in Welland. And then I also talked about the potential for possibility of working together, performing art space as they look forward to the future at E.L. Crosley. They're not doing that now, nor are they saying there's a problem at Crosley, but it's something to keep on the radar. They actually have access to some dollars from the province that we don't have access to, so they might be able to accommodate something there. We did invite staff to present here at the council meeting as a request of Councillor Kersey, but unfortunately we got a message on Tuesday, I think it was, that they could not be here to present. So they did provide the documents that were requested, which are copies of those agreements, etc. And that issue was discussed at our briefly at our Maple Acre accommodation committee on Friday as well. And the results of that on Friday was that to continue in the mode, for a number of reasons, continue in the direction that we're headed. Cognizant that there is still a report or a request that has to go to the library board and a report that has to come back to council. Finally, in my report, Remembrance Day commemorations. Thanks very much to the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 613, the Ladies Auxiliary, the Army Cadets for organizing a heartfelt and special Remembrance Day commemorations in Fenwick, Ridgeville, Fonthill on the Sunday, November 8th, and also at Veterans Park on Remembrance Day. Thanks to council colleagues for assisting with the placing of wreaths to remember those lost and who gave the ultimate sacrifice during times of, and we honored those that served our country during times of war, conflict, and peace. And also thanks to all those that participated in the event on Remembrance Day itself. So thank yous to Councillor Junkin, Ribiak, King, Durley, and Papp for laying wreaths at those various cenotaphs throughout our town. Beautiful weather, thankfully, so it's always nice to see that. What I didn't include here was I believe it's 17 veterans live at Lookout Ridge. And they put on a wonderful ceremony at 10:15 on Remembrance Day, and it's very moving as well. Many of them don't want to brave the weather, despite the nice weather that it was, and they prefer to commemorate Remembrance Day in their chapel. It's a very moving service as well, and I was able to participate in that on your behalf. So that is my report. Are there any questions from members of council on any of those items? Thank you. There being none, it's been moved by Councillor Durley, second by Councillor King. Be it resolved, the council receive Mayor Augustine's report for November 16th, 2015 for information. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we move to a couple of verbal reports. The first from Councillor Junkin. Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Dave. As council will recall, I was handed the portfolio of the Niagara Road 12 landfill site, not because of my knowledge of this portfolio, of which I candidly admit I had none, but to do with my geographical location, that being I was the council member closest to the facility. Upon meeting the site's manager, Andrew Winters, it became apparent that Mr. Winters and his management team are completely committed to the recycling program. Of the 16,000 tons of material taken in by this site every year, 52% is recycled or was recycled in 2014. The long-term goal is to recycle 65% of all material received. This is indeed a lofty goal when one realizes that for every 1% gained in the recycling program, that is 1,500 tons that does not go into the landfill site. Because of their recycling efforts, the useful life of this site has increased by 25 years over the original estimates and is now expected to last another 44 years. On the money side of things, this last summer saw the replacement of the weigh scales, which had reached the end of their lifespans. Total cost of this project was $120,000. Next up to be replaced are the two pumps which control the leachate ponds located on site. Sometime in the new year, a trip to Durham to tour that region's state-of-the-art facility is being planned for all interested committee members and staff members. It should also be noted that this site serves the township of West Lincoln, the town of Lincoln, Pelham, and Grimsby. And that is my report.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Questions for Councillor Junkin? The clerk has indicated, Councillor, if you'd like to part with your notes, the clerk can keep them on file and add them to the minutes.
I hope you can read them, but yes, I will.
She can read my writing, so I'm sure she can read yours. Thank you. So do we need a motion to receive?
If he turns it in, then we can have a motion to receive.
Clerk's suggesting if you turn it in, it would be in order to have a motion to receive. So
No. Okay, yeah, I'm going to turn it in.
Okay, so can we have a motion moved by Councillor Junkin, second by Councillor Papp, that we receive Councillor Junkin's report on Niagara Road 12 landfill site?
Okay.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Papp.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It was indeed my pleasure to represent the town, yourself, members of council, and the staff on November 13th, Friday, at White Oaks with the Wellspring Starry Gala. And to say the least, it was sold out. There were a number of people there, and I have to tell you that we took them by surprise. As you know, a simple conversation 3 years ago, myself and a few others, here we are 3 years later. We are ready to move on the Wellspring facility, which is being proposed at somewhere around 10,000 square feet. The most important part is not the building itself, but more importantly, the people that it'll help support as they work through their journey of dealing with cancer treatment and ultimately the losses that occur. I think for Chair Joe Matthews, who's Deputy Chief of the Police, and Mantine, Executive Director, the highlight, and I want to thank my colleagues, is I presented them. And this is normally done, some of you have been around, this is normally done, it isn't done too often. Usually streets are named after individuals, those significant things that have happened throughout the course of a municipal's history, a municipal corporation's history. And we decided, and they were, I have to tell you, totally stunned, that we're going to name the roadway leading into their new facility as Wellspring Way. So there wasn't one dry eye there. They were just totally taken back and are so thankful for all of it. And we complimented it by hearing once again, as every year, a family member who they're fourth generation grape growers in Niagara Lake, who's 54 years old, and this gentleman has struggled. I can't even describe what he's been through in the last 2 years. And he said if it wasn't for the Wellspring Support Group, I don't know if he would have made it and continued to fight the fight. So we should be extremely proud as a municipality. There was Mayors Joyner, Easton, a number of the major corporations around. And the town of Pelham can stand up, and I stated quite emphatically to the total public, it's not just about us as the town, it's a reflection of what we're doing for all of the region, especially those that are struggling with all this. So I thank the opportunity. It was quite fulfilling, and I have to tell you that everybody else there, I said this is a legacy. That sign will never come down. The only time it would come down is if, in fact, forgive me, we were to cure cancer, then we'd be happy to take that sign down and redo that. But in the meantime, we've set a whole...
Really Wellspring Way.
Wellspring Way is now officially recognized throughout the region, and the town of Pelham should be extremely proud of that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Papp, for representing council that evening. I have the photo here that was taken, or a photo. I'm sure there were many that were taken, so that's great that you're presenting that. It's awesome. Yes. And very, very pleased that it's so well received. Thank you very much for the verbal update on that, and thank you for representing council.
My pleasure. My honor.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to send this photo around to folks. Thank you. That was on Joe Matthews' social media account, I believe, that he sent that out, and the Chief of Police as well, so thank you. Thank you. Now we move to staff reports requiring action. It's been moved by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, the council receive the issue summary report regarding proposal for ExploreNet Communication Tower to be located at 1261 Victoria Avenue for information, and the council, through a resolution, indicate concurrence of the proposed communication tower to be located at 1261 Victoria Avenue and set back 47.5 meters, 150 feet from the property line, subject to the satisfaction of Industry Canada's requirements. Questions or comments? I think the report states it very well, and in terms of a request, so this does take in the request from West Lincoln. There being no other comments, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. I get emails from rural residents quite often about increasing coverage for internet, etc. So hopefully that will be an option for them. Thank you. Been moved by Councillor Ribbiak, seconded by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, the council receives the issue summary report for information as pertains to the executed subdivision agreement between the town and 937776 Inc., M&J Homes, regarding the Rittenhouse subdivision file number 26T19-1201, and council consider the bylaw to amend the subdivision agreement, and that the town solicitor be directed to lift the temporary easement. Questions, comments? There being none, I call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion's carried. The next item is moved by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, the council receive the issue summary report entitled Cost Sharing Agreement with River Realty, and that the following recommendation be enacted: that council approve the cost-sharing agreement between the town and River Realty Development 1976 Inc., and at the mayor and clerk be directed to sign the cost-sharing agreement on behalf of the town. I note that two members representing River Realty are here this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Any questions, comments regarding this agreement? Very similar to another agreement that we signed with the Allen Group. Thank you for staff for working together, and River Realty for working together in a spirit of congeniality as well. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Now we move to the final item here. It's been moved by Councillor Durley, seconded by Councillor King. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a great evening. Moved by Councillor Durley, seconded by Councillor King. Be it resolved, the council receive the issue summary report, female change room request, Pelham Arena follow-up for information, and the council approve the additional budgetary requirement of $23,815 plus HST to secure a contractor for these renovations. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a necessity. However, when I read the report, some of the areas within the arena which are now being used by minor hockey and actually the old timers when they have their tournament and the silver stick people and all that will now be usurped from use. I'm just wondering what kind of consideration has been given, because that's a very valuable space during these very busy times. If in fact the minor hockey office and the other facilities around that now become female change rooms, where will minor hockey be able to operate as an office, and where will the headquarters for these tournaments be? Just a question that begs an answer.
Ms. Van Ravensway?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We had an on-site meeting with minor hockey, and they are quite in agreement with the plan. They see no issue with dividing up the office area. There's going to be access and additional doors, so you can come in and out both on the hallway as well as having access to see the ice as well.
Okay, my question was, they still will have an office in which they can set up their headquarters and all that, even with the presence of their dressing room?
They felt that they had enough room.
Okay, that's good. Question answered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Certainly this is an issue that was raised a couple of times, a couple of years in a row, and years before that, but formally here in our budget process, so very pleased we're finally moving ahead with this. And it says in the report 6 weeks, so hopefully that will keep us advised of progress. Thank you. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we move to bylaws. Councillor Durley.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to pull bylaw 3681 regarding 1022 Pelham Street rezoning for separate consideration, please.
Thank you. Any other items to be lifted for separate consideration, Councillor?
So I would like to lift 16.1.
Sorry. 16.1. Do you happen to know the bylaw number, Councillor?
Oh, bylaw number 3678, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 1136 for lands located on the east side of Hay
Okay.
Street.
So you want to lift the first one? That's for the residential. That's to make it residential.
Yeah.
What, you want to lift that one?
Yes.
Okay,
You're talking Hay Street here.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a different one.
sorry.
That's a different one?
That's a totally different one, Mark.
That's an entirely different
That's
development.
a totally different development, Mark.
This is Haste.
Sorry, that's Hay Street north of Highway 20, Village of Fawn Hill. Do you want to lift that one?
Lucetta's property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
sorry.
all right.
I thought it was the other item. Thank you.
Okay.
Other bylaws? There be none. How do we do with bylaws in terms of lifting? Are they dealt in block and then,
Do the block, and then we'll go to each individual one.
what would that do to numbering?
I can take care of the numbering as a housekeeping matter.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Mayor.
I was just asking the clerk about dealing with these. We don't often deal with them of this way. What the clerk's suggesting is that we deal with them in block and then deal with the two lifted items. It may change the numbering of the bylaws, which is what my question was, and she says she can deal with that, so thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Ribbiak, seconded by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, the Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass the same, that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. So the second bylaw, bylaw 3679, 2015, being a bylaw to adopt an amendment to the official plan adopted by bylaw 3259 and confirmed by the Ontario Municipal Board decision of July 18, 2014 for the Town of Pelham Planning Area Amendment Number 2, 1022 Pelham Street, 4 High Street, Inc., file number OPAM 0315. Bylaw, the next bylaw, 3680, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw 1136 as amended for lands located south of Welland Road, west of Pelham Street, municipally known as 1022 Pelham Street, legally described as part of concession 10, part lot 1, RP 59 R10892, parts 4 and 7, from neighborhood commercial to a site-specific exemption NC 108, and agricultural A to residential multiple RM1 with a holding provision. Owner agent for High Street Inc., Sovereign Assets Management, file number AM 0713. Bylaw 5, bylaw 3682, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a site plan agreement for the lands located at 1022 Pelham Street for High Street Inc., file number SP 0315. Bylaw 3683, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a site plan agreement for lands located at 483 Highway 20 West, Minor Brothers Farm Supply, file number SP 0415. Bylaw 3684, being a bylaw to exempt Block 12 in Registered Plan 59M 405 and part of Block 31 in Registered Plan 59M 358 from part lot control pursuant to Section 50 of the Planning Act 1990. 1882993 Ontario Limited, Niagara Pines Development. And bylaw 3685, being a bylaw to amend the subdivision agreement with 937776 Ontario Inc., M&J Homes, Rittenhouse Subdivision, file number 26T19-0201, 1987, is amended for lands south of Welland Road and east of Church Street. Sorry. I skipped the spot here. 26T190215. And now the bylaw is here, but it isn't here. Number 9 isn't here. This is no longer here. Sorry. It was that other issue at 792, which is no longer on the agenda. So those are the bylaws. Questions or comments to any of those bylaws? One of the bylaws is changing the official plan at 1022 Pelham Street and adding that residential buffer area as was known. And it also is approving the site plan agreement, which includes the buffering, trees, and also the reduction of pump bays from 4 to 5. So there being no other, Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For clarity, and I'm not sure what my esteemed colleague has lifted item number 4, regarding, but it seems to me that we're dealing with a whole suite of bylaws here. And depending upon what he's proposing in 4, it may in fact have an impact on, at the very least, the site plan. So in one hand, we can't approve a site plan if on the other hand, his intention is to bring this back to the floor for further discussion and a vote, because that would impact on what the site plan looks like. So.
So you're
I would
suggesting
suggest
this
that we
pull 5 out,
Well, I think we probably should pull all of them out that pertain to that piece of property until we find out what's on our counselor's mind.
Thank you. I would recommend, I don't know if Councillor Durley, if you want to comment, but maybe we just pull out the site plan piece pending that and just deal with that afterwards. Councillor Durley, would that make sense?
Mr. Mayor, I have no problem with the adding the residential piece and that good thing. This is why I wanted to leave that alone. However, I have some concerns with the commercial portion, and that is why I lifted this one. If it does affect the site plan, perhaps it's in order to pull both of them as well, because one may affect the other if in fact there is a change. So I have no objection to that, and I thank my colleague for bringing that forward.
Do we lift it and deal with it after? Okay, so Councillor Kersey, I think it makes sense to lift 3682, as you suggested, and deal with it immediately following consideration of Councillor Durley's lifting of the one previous. Does that make sense?
I'd also like to ask a question on a point of order and process. If it seems to me at our last council meeting, we dealt with this issue, we voted on it on a recorded vote, and we directed staff to prepare these bylaws. So unless there's something very specific about the bylaw, the wording in the bylaw, I think we've dealt with this issue.
Yeah.
And that it would be inappropriate to pull this with the intent to reverse the decision that was made at our last council meeting. We directed staff on a recorded vote, we got the bylaw, and so unless there's something very specific in that bylaw, the wording of the bylaw, I don't think we can deal with it at this, in terms of a reversal.
Thank you, Councillor Kersey, for your opinion on that matter. I am of the opinion that it is in order to lift this for separate consideration. I believe that the councillor, I haven't talked to him about this, but I'm presuming that he wants to have a recorded vote on the bylaw. Is that correct, Councillor?
Yep.
So it's to have a recorded vote on the bylaw itself, and I believe it is in order to do this.
That's fine.
Okay? Sure. Thank you for raising that, though. Any further questions? Okay, so for those that are remaining, this is just so everybody knows who's playing at home, this is for the residential official plan amendment. This is for the zoning of that residential area at 1022 Pelham Street, and then other bylaws. The bylaw for Minor Brothers, the bylaw for Niagara Pines Developments, and the bylaw for Rittenhouse. Councillors, okay for calling the question on those? Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Councillor Durley, you lifted bylaw 4, which is 3681, and that's regarding the zoning bylaw amendment. So it has been moved. I guess, is it on the floor, Olivia?
It's on the floor as presented there with Riviak and Durley.
Okay, so it is on the floor. Riviak Durley, Councillor, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, my request is that we just do a recorded vote on accepting or rejecting that.
Okay, thank you. I would ask the clerk to undertake the recorded vote, please. And this is for the zoning amendment. There may be a question from a councillor.
There's a question. We were discussing a moment ago about the need to look at 3 and 5 as well. I take it that the recorded vote on 4 will resolve the other two as well, or do we have to vote on those that were lifted?
So we lifted 5, we didn't need to lift 3. So we lifted 5, which is the site plan. So we lifted the site plan on this property, and I think Councillor Kersey made the case that if the zoning doesn't change on the property, you can't approve the site plan. So you made a good case.
But our vote on that doesn't impact on any other item in this list.
We're only voting on 4, and then we're going to vote on 5.
Ah, okay. Voting on 4.
So 4 is the zoning on
Got it. Got it.
to add that wording for, what is it? Trying to get the wording here, but automotive service and sales.
No, I understand the issues, just wanted to know where we were.
What is it, gasoline?
Fuel retail.
Fuel retail outlet. Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? Are we okay with the clerk undertaking the vote? Madam Clerk.
Thank you. So this is the vote on bylaw presented as 3681 to amend the zoning bylaw 1136/1987. If you are in favor of the bylaw, answer yay. If you are opposed to the bylaw, answer nay. Councillor Kersey.
Yay.
Councillor Durley.
Nay.
Councillor Junkin.
Nay.
Councillor King.
Yay.
Councillor Papp.
Nay.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Yay?
Mayor Augustine.
In favor. Yay.
The motion carries.
Thank you. The motion has carried. And now to deal with bylaw number 5, which is the site plan for that area, and indicated that those items have been changed that were requested by council. Any further discussion to that? So can I call the question? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That site plan carries. And finally, Councillor Junkin, we didn't forget about you. You lifted the bylaw for Lucetta Construction Limited. So this is bylaw 78, being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw 1136 as amended for lands located on the east side of Hay Street, north of Highway 20, municipally known as 1535 Hay Street. Rezone the lands from residential 1 with a holding provision, R1H, residential 1 site-specific exemption with holding provision R1209H, residential 1 site-specific exemption with holding provision R1210H, and open space OS zones to residential multiple site-specific exemption RM1253 Lucetta Construction Limited, file number AM0411. Councillor.
So I realize this is an 11th hour plea or whatever you want to call it. But as soon as this bylaw does become law, the opportunity to have that street or that trail connect from Hay Street to the Marlene Stewart hiking trails will be gone forever. That's all there is. I honestly believe that somewhere along the line, our planning department from years gone by really dropped the ball on this. It should have been right in the, when this development started going, we should have either offered to buy or had this company donate a 5-foot trail. It's a big development, it's 11 acres, 5 feet would have killed this company to keep that trail alive. We consider ourselves to be a walkability area, and like I say, once this goes, it's gone. So what I want to do, and I realize, like I say, this is the 11th hour, I probably should have brought this up at Committee of the Whole. I want to make a motion that we turn this bylaw back to planning so that they can make one last pitch to Lucetta Homes to either donate the property to the town or see if they are open to us buying a stretch of land to keep that on the southernmost boundary, to keep that walking trail open.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder for Councillor Junkin's motion? Councillor Junkin, there is no seconder.
I will second that, just
You'll
to
second
put
that?
that on the table. I think it's worth discussing regardless of the outcome.
Okay, thank you. The motion is to then refer this back to staff to see if, and enter discussions with Lucetta Homes to see if they can change their entire site plan that they've been working on to put in a 5-foot trail.
5-foot walkway, yes.
Correct.
Trail.
Discussion to this matter. I'm going to turn to Councillor Ribbiak and then Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seconded this because I do think it's worth us addressing and making it clear to anybody who looks at this why we do what we do. I do agree with Councillor Junkin that this is at the 11th hour. And I know that we've had discussion about this issue in meetings before, in fact, I think in councils before this one. And the bylaw, as stated, is a reflection of what we as a council has indicated as our best considered opinion as to what should happen. So I'm not going to support it, but I do want to make it clear that this is something that has been well discussed for quite a considerable period of time, and I think that where we have gotten to is really the best place for us to be.
Thank you.
Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sort of along that line, there were several public meetings, and I know there was a public outcry from residents in the area that this was historically a walking trail, or used as a walking trail. However, it was private property, and with this awareness that has been historic, I'm sure that has entered discussion with the developers and with everybody involved. So I have to agree with my colleague that it's not a new issue. It's not something that just popped up. It has been something that's been on the radar ever since this development was proposed, and I'm sure it has been considered. And in fact, looking at the report and the way things have happened in that, I don't think that the owner is willing to do that. And in fact, it is private property.
Thank you. Others? I just want to comment. This is something that, as was said, has come up at public meetings, been talked about extensively. And Councillor Junkin, your comment that there is no access, this will close the access, that is not factually correct. There is access through Marlene Stewart Street Park. There's access, as I understand it, through from Hurricane Road as well, public access to the Lathrop property. There has been a series of correspondence from the Nature Conservancy. In fact, they wanted a fence there to not have people walk in this area. They are the ones that are stewards of this land. So this has been dealt with, and I would encourage the councillor in future to raise these matters in committee.
Yes, I realize that.
And it is within your rights to do this, but I would encourage you to do that, to have, and then we can have the more fulsome discussion and things like that, and answer the questions. So those are the facts, and I think it has been dealt with. In fact, I remember asking staff to investigate whether there might be a possibility to link into those lands in another way, north of this particular property, et cetera. And I mean, we do have a sidewalk that goes kind of down Hay Street. Could it not go immediately to the east and link with this property? And I'm sure they're still investigating that. So there are other access routes to this property, and I think it has been dealt with, and this company does want to get on with their development, and they've been dealing with it for years. Councillor Junkin?
Yeah, just to close, I realize there's other access. I'm thinking of the big development that is taking place on the west side of Hay Street. Those people obviously are going to have to go all the way around. They're not going to have this direct link. And as far as approaching that property from the north, again, Lathrop does not want anyone going through that. So that's probably never going to happen. That direct route along the southern boundary, that's probably the only chance that they're ever going to have of keeping that particular access open. But if council, whatever, I just thought I'd bring it up, and if it doesn't have support, it doesn't have support.
Okay, thank you very much. We ready for calling of the question on the motion? All those in favor? Sorry, the motion is to refer back to staff. So
No.
all those in favor of the referral motion? All those opposed? The referral is lost. Now to the main motion, and that is the bylaw. Are we ready for calling the question of the bylaw? All those in favor? Any opposed? That bylaw carries. Councillor Kersey?
Mr. Mayor, since Councillor Junkin raised the issue and has some interest in it, I wonder if staff would be good enough to bring us an update report on their conversations with the Conservancy regarding a westerly access off of Haste at the end of the sidewalk, and whether they would even be interested in considering something like that.
Thank you. Mr. CEO, is that Can we count that as direction?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, council colleagues, it's okay for direction to staff? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, for raising that, and we'll consider that direction to staff to come forward with an update report. We do have one in-camera item, and as is our practice, we recess this to immediately follow in committee, and it's been moved by Councillor Ribbiak, seconded by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, the council recess the in-camera portion of the meeting and reconvene that portion immediately following the Policy and Priorities Committee meeting scheduled for later this evening. Please call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. This meeting is in recess. Thank you. A couple of minutes to switch up to P&P. Thank you.